Hello and welcome to Mr.EvilWakes. If you love scary stories to sleep to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from in the world. Now, relax, close your eyes, and let the rain carry you into the darkness.
Story 1. Evacuate all cemeteries now. Something is emerging. The warning came over the city works truck radio. It was early, the sky still dark. The voice said all civilians should immediately evacuate areas near cemeteries. No explanation, no deadline, just the mechanical, repetitive tone of a message that seemed to already know no one would listen to it all. I listened to the end. And I stayed, not out of stubbornness, not out of courage. I stayed because, this is my job. Ever since I moved to rural Minnesota, I've been responsible for taking care of St. Elgin's Cemetery. No one else wanted it. Too quiet, too isolated, too dead. But it was everything I was looking for. Peace, silence, routine. I never thought the world could get quieter than it is here. But after that alert, the silence changed shape. It became heavy, as if the very air was trying to hide something from me. That morning, I walked to the cemetery gate and looked down the road. There were no cars. Not even the birds were singing. The world seemed to be waiting for me to be the last one to leave. And I didn't. I decided to record everything. I grabbed my old recorder, the same one I used to log grave locations. I started talking, first to myself, then, to something I can't name. The soil was dry, but it left marks as if someone had walked on it during the night. The graves seemed deeper than yesterday. And, I swear, one of the angel statues had changed the position of its hands. I don't know what's happening. But I can tell you what I saw, what I heard, and what I buried, or what I thought I buried. I know this recording might never be heard by anyone. Or maybe it will be heard by someone who isn't quite human anymore. Either way, this needs to be said. They're standing now, and they remember. My name is Thomas Reed. I was born in Dunedin, New Zealand, but I've lived in the United States for almost 20 years. I've never been a big city person. I always felt better surrounded by empty spaces, seldom used trails, open skies. When I saw the Grey Hollow City Council's ad looking for a caretaker for the local cemetery, I didn't think twice. No one else wanted the job. The place was old, far from town, too small to justify a team of employees. But for me, it was perfect. St. Elgin's is at the end of a back road, surrounded by dense pine forest and a dry lake to the west. The iron gate doesn't close properly anymore, and the stone wall has gaps in some sections, but it's never been a problem. No one came here without a reason. And those who did usually just wanted to talk for a few minutes with someone who no longer responded. My house is in the back. It's a simple, single-story building with 3 rooms. It has running water, electricity, and a fireplace that works well in winter. At night, I usually make tea, read a book, or listen to the radio until I fall asleep. I've always liked routine. The cemetery taught me to respect time, to accept what doesn't return, and to speak little. My daily tasks included cutting the weeds between the graves, cleaning the headstones, fixing fences, and painting the tool shed once in a while. Sometimes a family would show up for a visit. I'd nod in greeting and go back to my work. It was like living inside a paused calendar. Nothing changed, and I didn't feel the need for change either. But a few weeks ago, things started to go awry. I'm not talking about major events. Not yet, but small details. Subtle, almost imperceptible things. The crows, for example. There had always been crows here, perched in the trees around the cemetery. Always watching, as if they were part of the place's ritual. And then, one day, they simply vanished. No sound, no feathers on the ground. As if they had received a warning. Before us. Another detail, the smell. The morning air always had the same cold, slightly damp scent of cut grass. But it started to have a different odor. Something like the soil itself was breathing. It was subtle, but constant. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was my imagination, maybe some unexpected decomposition. But that feeling wouldn't go away. It was as if I was being watched. Not by someone, but by the place itself. I kept working. Routine was all I had. Until I got that alert on the truck radio. And everything changed. The first thing that truly made me stop what I was doing happened 2 days before the national alert. It was a warm afternoon, clear sky, and I was closing a new grave in the east section. The burial had been simple, no family present. A man with no relatives, donated by the local hospital. Just me, the priest, and the sealed coffin. Nothing out of the ordinary. I buried him as usual, covering the grave with fresh earth and settling the temporary wooden cross. I left, thinking about what I'd make for dinner. But the next morning, when I returned to check on the job, I noticed something wrong. There were marks on the dirt. Finger marks. Not footprints, not animal tracks. These were 5 parallel scratches, curved as if a hand had pressed the soil from the inside out. I stared at them for a few seconds. I tried to rationalize. Maybe the soil was unstable, maybe a root was pushing up the dirt. But when I knelt to examine it more closely, I felt the heat. The surface of the grave was warm. Not lukewarm. Hot. As if something had been buried alive and was still trying to get out. I took a step back. I looked around. No sound. No sign of animals. Even so, I decided to dig a little, just to make sure nothing was out of place. I slowly inserted the shovel, removed the first layer of earth, and stopped. The coffin was there, intact, no cracks, but the heat was coming from inside it. I stood there, shovel in hand, trying to decide whether or not to open it. In the end, I decided to leave it be. I sealed the earth again. I wrote down the grave number. And I went home with my stomach churning. At night, I had trouble sleeping. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was a different feeling, as if I had forgotten something important. As if someone had told me a secret I couldn't remember. The kind of feeling you try to push to the back of your mind, but that comes back every time you close your eyes. Around 2 in the morning, I got out of bed and went to the porch. The cemetery, illuminated by the faint light of the street lamp, seemed peaceful. No movement, no sound. Then I heard it. 3 dry thuds, coming from the direction of the old mausoleum. It was a muffled, rhythmic sound. As if someone was knocking from inside the concrete wall. I stood motionless. My first instinct was to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was the wind, maybe a tree had fallen. But the sound was specific. Controlled. Almost polite. I went to the kitchen, grabbed my flashlight, and went back outside. I walked slowly to the mausoleum. The iron door was locked, as always. I shined the flashlight over it. No signs of forced entry. No cracks. I touched the surface. It was cold. Everything seemed normal. But when I turned to leave, I heard a different sound. A whisper. I couldn't understand what it said, but it sounded like my name. Not spoken, exactly. More like it had been projected inside my head. Something short, sibilant, almost familiar. I went back to the house without looking back. I locked the door. I closed the curtains. And I sat there until dawn, with the light on, my heart heavy, and my mind trying to construct explanations that made sense. The next morning, I restarted the recording. It was the first time. I had recorded an event I didn't want to forget. Or maybe, something I didn't want to make me forget. After that night, I started paying attention to the small things. To the pauses between tasks, to the silences that lasted too long, to the patterns that, little by little, began to break apart. First, it was the radio. I left it on in the truck while cleaning the chapel steps. I always listened to a local news station, more out of habit than interest. But that day, the transmission cut out mid-sentence and never came back. I tried changing stations, but all were covered in static, except one. A single frequency broadcast a looped recording. The same voice from the alert I'd heard before. Monotonous, robotic, repeating, evacuate immediately. Maintain a 1 kilometer distance from any permanent resting area. This is not a test. I left the radio on anyway. The sound was unsettling, but there was something worse in the silence. Next was my cell phone. No signal. No bars, no network. I tried restarting it, climbing to a higher point, even driving the truck to the main road entrance. Nothing. It was as if the outside world had shut down. Only no one told me. I went back to the cemetery, trying to convince myself it was just a local problem. A solar flare, a blackout, something that reason could explain. But with each passing day, the explanations grew weaker. On Wednesday, I prepared the burial of a man named Charles Manning. He had died in a nursing home, with no family. The body was sent in a simple coffin. I did the service alone. I buried him, placed the cross with his name and date. Everything as usual. The next morning, the grave was there, but there was no name on the cross. No Charles, no date, nothing. Just raw wood. I thought the winter rain might have erased it, but the surface was too clean, no marks, no signs of wear. As if that cross had never been written on. As if I had never performed that burial. I decided to check the record in my notebook. But the corresponding page was also blank. The space between the previous day and the next day existed. The paper was there, but there were no notes. Not even a faint pen mark. The day, somehow, had been erased. I went to the chapel to look for the archives. I opened the register book and looked for Charles's name. Nothing. No mention. I looked for the documents that came with the coffin. The medical chart. The death certificate. All gone. I started to feel disoriented. It wasn't just a mistake. It was as if someone, or something, was correcting reality in real time, undoing the small proofs that that person had existed. And not just that, as if it was also testing how much I would notice. At night, I went to check the stone statues that decorated the cemetery entrance. There were 3 angels, one on each side and a central one. They had always been there. But something was different. The position of their arms had changed. The central angel, who held a torch aloft, now held the torch downwards. As if indicating that the light had gone out. I stood watching for minutes. I tried to remember if I had seen it like this before. I couldn't. I started to doubt my own memory. In the early hours, I began to hear constant noises, muffled groans, light footsteps on dry leaves, the sound of someone breathing very close to my window, although outside there were only pine trees. One of the most repeated sounds was like a shovel hitting the ground. But not the way a human digs. It was more irregular, slower, as if something was trying to dig with its hands. I recorded several of these nights. But when I listened to the tapes, the sound was always distorted, as if the recorder was picking up a different frequency, a layer below human hearing. On the 5th day, I went to check Charles's coffin. I dug until I found it. But the space was empty. No body. No box. Just loose dirt, as if it had never been filled. The cross was still there, blank, pointing to a void that shouldn't exist. There were no signs of excavation. Not even disturbed roots. It was as if the ground had opened on its own, swallowed the contents, and then closed carefully. That night, I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark. The world outside my window seemed to move strangely, as if breathing slowly. The shadows were longer, and for a second, I thought I saw someone standing among the graves. Not a blur, a motionless silhouette, looking towards my house. I went to the door and yelled, "Who's there?" Silence. Then I heard that whisper again. The same one from the mausoleum night. This time, I understood what it said, "You have a place too." After hearing that whisper, I found myself forced to confront what I had been avoiding. There was something here with me. Something that wasn't interested in hiding, but in getting me used to its presence. To the idea of it. And perhaps even to its voice. My mind still tried to remain rational. Even after the distorted recordings, the disappearing records, the shape-shifting statues, I clung to the idea that there was an explanation. Maybe a psychotic break, prolonged isolation, poisoning by some gas. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. I needed proof, some confirmation. So I did what I thought was most logical. I went back to the chapel archives, this time looking for old gravediggers. There was a wooden box, buried under dust and termites, with old notebooks. Handwritten accounts by men who had done exactly what I was doing now, cleaning, burying, recording, and above all, observing. Most of the notes were mundane. Dates, names, simple repairs. But in one of the notebooks, signed by a certain Matthew Corrigan, I found something different. He wrote about night noises. About voices that imitated dead relatives. About graves that breathed. He used that word, breathe. And on one of the last pages, there was a sentence underlined 3 times. Never sleep less than 10 paces from the old ground. It dreams more than we do. I slowly closed the notebook. The ink was faded, but still legible. The fear, on the other hand, was alive in that handwriting. I went home feeling like I wasn't the first. That perhaps no one in that position had left their hole. If they left at all. I decided to set up cameras. I took 2 old security cameras, hooked them up to an isolated system, and positioned one at the cemetery entrance and another facing the west section, where the mausoleum was. I set them to record during the early hours and left them running. The next morning, I went to review the videos. The one at the entrance showed hours of darkness, nothing but the wind swaying the trees. But, around 3:17 a.m., something appeared in the recording from the west section. It was hard to see in the dark, but there was movement among the graves. It wasn't an animal. It was an upright figure, thin, walking slowly, as if searching for something. But what chilled my blood was the position of its head. The figure walked forward, but with its head turned completely backward, as if its face was looking directly at the camera. I paused the video. I increased the brightness. And I saw myself there. That thing had my face. The recording became corrupted seconds later. The screen froze and, when it returned, the image only showed the empty field again. As if nothing had ever passed through there. I rewound the segment at least 10 times. Each time, the same sequence, the thing walking among the graves, head turned towards the camera, and my face staring at myself. I turned off the system. But I didn't delete the files. I put the memory cards in a locked drawer. Not because I wanted to preserve the evidence, but because I feared that if I deleted it, it would return another way. That night, I decided I wouldn't sleep. I made strong coffee, left the lights on, and sat in front of the window, watching the cemetery outside. It was strange to think that the only thing separating me from that world was a thin pane of glass and the fact that I still considered myself alive. But, how long would that remain true? Shortly after 2 in the morning, I heard a sound coming from the porch. I went to the door with my flashlight. Something was there. A recorder. Just like mine. I picked it up carefully. I turned it on. The sound was static for a few seconds, then it started playing. My voice, repeating the same phrase I had recorded 2 days earlier, right after burying Charles Manning. But there was a difference. The recording continued after the original phrase, as if someone had added something. And this second part was no longer my voice. It was a variation of it. Slower, more drawn out, as if someone was imitating my way of speaking, but without understanding the meaning behind the words. It said, "You're doing this because you've done it before. And you'll do it again. We are memory. You are too." At that moment, I understood that perhaps nothing I was experiencing was new. That this cemetery didn't just hold bodies, but experiences. Repetitions. Copies. Echoes of everything that had been done there before. And I was just another sound repeating itself. I sat back down, in silence. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the idea that perhaps the evacuation warning wasn't to protect the living from the dead, but the living from themselves. The next morning, I looked at my own house as if it were no longer mine. Nothing had moved, yet everything seemed displaced. As if the place had been rebuilt based on someone's memory of me, but without understanding the details. The kitchen chair was turned towards the wall. The bathroom mirror reflected my room, not the hallway. And the back door, which always creaked, now opened in absolute silence. I went to the cemetery, trying to keep my head straight. The sky was overcast, but there was no rain in the forecast. The air seemed suspended, as if the world was holding its breath. I walked among the graves with the recorder in my pocket. I recorded the sound of my footsteps, the rustling of leaves, and something else. A deep, constant sound. A kind of subterranean rumble. It was as if the ground itself was vibrating. I reached the mausoleum. The door, previously locked with chains, was ajar. No sign of forced entry. I pushed it open slowly. The darkness inside seemed denser than it should be. As if the air didn't move, as if it absorbed light. I turned on my flashlight. The inner walls were covered with marks. They weren't scribbles or symbols. They were words. Hundreds of them, all with the same name, Thomas Reed. Written in different sizes, different handwritings. Some shaky, others firm. All identical to my name. My body froze. I tried to rationalize. Hallucination. Delusion. Someone playing a trick. But then I looked at the ceiling. There, in larger letters, it was written. You bury yourself every time you try to leave. I ran. My heart felt like it was beating outside my chest. I went back home, locked all the doors. I grabbed the memory cards, the old notebooks, my recordings, everything. I needed to understand. I started listening to the audios again. But something had changed. In almost every track, my voice had been overlaid by another, lower, drier, like a delayed echo. But it didn't repeat the words, it commented. As if something was accompanying me while I recorded and leaving notes for itself. In one of the recordings, as I described the blank cross on Charles's grave, the other voice whispered. Charles never existed. It was just a name to prepare you. With each new file, more sections with these intrusions appeared. Names, phrases, dates, all being denied. As if everything I had done was a staged act. As if I was living an earlier version of my own story. At 3:17 in the morning, something woke up. It wasn't a sound. It was an absence. As if the whole world had paused for a second, and only I was conscious. I got out of bed as if pulled. I went to the window. Someone was at the gate. Or, something. It was my shape. Same size. Same hair. But the face wasn't exactly mine. It was as if it had been drawn from bad memories. Details were missing. The eyes were too wide. The smile, fixed, as if someone had pasted a human expression onto a clay face. And then I, spoke. But the lips didn't move. The voice came from inside my head, like the whisper from before, only clearer now. You stay here because you already know the end. I tried to blink, to move away from the window. But I couldn't. The whole world seemed frozen. Only I and that thing moved. That thing, turned slowly and pointed to the ground. And at that moment, I felt it. My body grew heavy. A weight that came from within, from my gut. As if I was being pulled down. I knelt on the living room floor, feeling a pressure rise through my legs. I was being pushed, not by hands, but by memories. By layers and layers of memory that weren't mine, but that recognized me anyway. I screamed, but the sound died before it left my throat. And then, everything returned. Time, sound, light. The figure at the gate was gone. But the footprints were still on the wet earth. And on the floor of my house, where I had knelt, there was dirt. Fresh, dark, as if my knees had sunk a few inches. In the recording from that night, my voice doesn't appear. Only the sound of something breathing. Deep, continuous. as if an open mouth was very close to the microphone. At the end of the audio, there's a phrase, spoken with my exact intonation. "You're already inside." After that night, something inside me changed. I don't know exactly when, or how, but I started to see the cemetery differently. No longer as a place of rest, but as a network, a field of buried pulsation, alive and watchful. During the day, I walked through the graves with a notebook in hand, trying to organize the dates, names, and records. I wanted to build a timeline. But I discovered something else. Many of the names repeated. Thomas, Reed, Matthew, Corrigan. They always returned, sometimes as deceased, others as gravediggers, gardeners, even as witnesses. As if they were versions of the same figure, dragged through time by some blind force. I went back to the chapel. I examined the stained glass windows. In one of them, I noticed a strange pattern. A man in a hat digging a hole, watched by shadowed figures behind gravestones. The man's face was damaged by time, but the silhouette, it was mine. The same coat, the same haircut, the same way he held the shovel. And that's when I understood. I wasn't the first to record this. And I'm not recording it for the first time. This account isn't new. It's not original. It's just another version, another cycle, another echo among hundreds that have faded and returned. The creature's words came back to my mind with greater clarity. You're doing this because you've done it before. And you'll do it again. My life, my name, my job here, all of it was a repetition. Not of memory, but of function. I was shaped to occupy this space. To witness, to record, and, in the end, to sink. And perhaps, to accept. I stopped fighting what I saw. I started listening to the subterranean sounds without fear. To hear the voices in the graves as if they were old acquaintances. At night, I slept with the door open. And I dreamed of wet earth covering my face. Not as a nightmare, but as a return. In the recording I made today, my voice sounds calm. Lower. I say that I have understood that the cemetery is not just soil and stone. It is made of intention, of history, of mistakes, and of remembrance. Every body buried here is not dead, it is being preserved. Like pages of a book that insists on being read, even by eyes that have already forgotten it. And I'm just another sentence in that book. It's night now. I don't know which night, or how many have passed. The clock on the wall stopped at 3:17 and refuses to move. I've stopped trying to adjust it. It's as if time here has given up trying to imitate the world outside. I'm sitting in the living room chair with the recorder in my hands. The same one as always. But it's different, heavier. The red light that indicates recording is on, even when it's off. I no longer know if it's me recording, or if I'm just the sound being recorded. Outside, the graves are silent. But the silence now speaks. It pulsates. If anyone listens to this audio, perhaps they will hear it too. A faint rhythm, like a crowd breathing in unison, beneath the earth. I recorded everything. And if you're listening, maybe it's already too late. The last thing I remember saying was that same phrase. On another tape, in another voice. And the recorder keeps repeating, as if there were no beginning or end, only the middle, that space between what we were and what we buried. I think I'm ready. The earth is soft today. Story 2. My new roommate won't stop knocking on my door at night. He moved in 2 days ago. I met Andrew through a Facebook post. I needed a roommate fast, and he messaged me 5 minutes after I posted in the local housing group. No profile picture. No mutual friends. But he said all the right things. Said he had a stable remote job, no pets, quiet, clean, respectful. I FaceTimed him once. He seemed normal. A little awkward, maybe, but I didn't care. I needed rent. He moved in on Friday. By Saturday night, I wanted him out. The first red flag was the way he unpacked. He brought 4 boxes. That's it. No bed, no decorations, not even a backpack. The boxes were taped tight and he carried them one at a time, always holding them away from his body, like they might bite. I offered to help. He didn't answer, just smiled, then took the last box into his room and shut the door. I didn't see him the rest of the day. Around midnight, I heard him whispering in there. Couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a prayer, or maybe, a list. He didn't stop until 3 a.m. The next morning, I went to make coffee. The kitchen was spotless. My cereal box was in the fridge. My coffee beans had been alphabetized. And there was a note on the counter, in blocky, perfect handwriting. I replaced your sponge. The old one had too many eyes. I stood there staring at it for a full minute. Then I opened the cupboard. New sponge, bright yellow, and on the floor beneath the sink, the old one. Soaked, covered in black mold I swear wasn't there the day before. The middle was ripped open, like it had teeth. That night, I locked my bedroom door. Around 2:11 a.m., I heard footsteps outside it. Slow, barefoot, careful, then a knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just 2 soft taps. I didn't move. Another knock. 3 this time, slightly faster. Andrew, I asked. No reply. I checked the peephole. No one there. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. But another note was taped to the wall. Don't answer until the 3rd knock. She gets impatient. I didn't sleep after that. I confronted him the next day. He was sitting in the living room, facing the blank TV screen. When I asked what the notes were about, he blinked slowly and said, "You heard her, didn't you?" Heard who? She doesn't like being seen too soon. It ruins her. Then he turned back to the blank TV. Smiling, I backed into my room and locked the door. That night, I heard him whispering again. Not to himself this time. I could hear the difference. He was answering someone, listening, nodding between each line. I pressed my ear to the wall. His voice came through clearer. "She wants to know your name," he said. "She wants to wear it." I stopped sleeping in the apartment after that. I stayed at a friend's for a night. No calls, no messages from Andrew. But I got a voicemail. No number. Just, unknown. 30 seconds of breathing, then whispering. Then, right before it ended, my own voice, saying, "Let me back in." I hadn't said that. I came home the next day, planning to kick him out. Tell him to pack up his 4 boxes and leave. But the boxes were gone. All that was left in his room was a circle of salt around the bed. Symbols drawn in the carpet. Charcoal, I think. Or blood. And one last note. "Don't break the circle. She likes you. She might not stop at your name." I called the police. They found the room empty. No Andrew. No salt. No symbols. Just an empty room with bare walls and cold air. They asked if I'd been drinking. That night, the knocking came again. 2:14 a.m. 3 soft knocks. I didn't move. Then I heard a voice, right outside the door. High-pitched. Childlike. Trying too hard to sound friendly. "I have your name." It scratched at the wood. "I want to give it back." I didn't answer. At 3 a.m. on the dot, it stopped. The next morning, the hallway wall was covered in fingerprints. Tiny. Like a child's. Burned into the paint. There was another note, slipped under my door. "She's inside now. Don't let her out. She wears new faces. You won't recognize them until they smile." I haven't seen Andrew since. I don't think I ever really met him. But I hear the knocking every night. Always at the same time. And always one knock closer. Story 3. My sister has always had a soft heart. Soft as sweetbread. She cried after the old woman, despite everything. Maybe because of everything. I remember holding her as she wept, both of us covered in soot, her fingers scalded from holding shut the oven door. After the tears, she was quiet. She trailed me through the awful house with its sweetbread walls and sugared windows. I found the clothes we'd arrived in, offered up her kirtle, and she donned it without a word. She showed no whisper of response when we found the treasure in the attic, only nodded vaguely when I asked her to help me fill up the few bags we could easily carry back through the woods. Maybe it would be enough. Enough to keep us safe from our stepmother's whims. I do not want to go back there. It was the first she'd spoken in hours. I hesitated outside the witch's cottage, looking back over my shoulder at her. I do not want to go back to them. I sighed. Nor do I. But where else can we go? She wrung her fingers together in front of her skirt, eyes downcast and her teeth digging into her lower lip. Eventually, though, she nodded. Fine. You were right. She looked back at the house. Wait 1 minute. There may be something left in the kitchen. The kitchen, I repeated in horror, but she only nodded. Yes. She did not think I paid attention, but I did. I know which of her potions might be useful. If nothing else, we can sell them when we get back. I nodded slowly and followed her back into the cottage, though I stopped in the open arch that led into the kitchen itself. She moved easily through the space, reminding me painfully of just how long she had been under the witch's thumb while the horrid crone tried to fatten me like a prize hog. She collected some dozen bottles and vials, tucking them carefully in between the bolts of silks and satins we had pilfered from the attic before returning to me. Let us go. Though there was no trail this time, she seemed to know her way through the trees. I asked how, once, when we paused to wait out the dark. But all she said was that she simply knew now. As though the forest spoke to her in a way it hadn't before. I felt the first thrill of fear at that. But I knew that she was still so scared herself, I refused to let her see it. I tried to coax her into dreaming about what sort of life we might have with the witch's pilfered treasure, and managed to earn a wan smile for my efforts. But it was cold and dark, and soon enough we simply huddled together under a gnarled tree as we waited for the deepest part of night to pass. When grayish dawnlight began to filter through the leaves, she was the first to stand. She had gone quiet again, and only answered me with faint hums or single words as we continued on our way. She seemed more comfortable to be leading us now, but something in the set of her shoulders reminded me of something. Something I could not quite name. Eventually, I lapsed into her silence. When the trees broke apart to reveal the familiar shape of our father's home, she froze. Then she broke into a run, and I was only half a step behind her. The door was already opening when we reached the stoop, and our father met us with his arms open and tears in his eyes. He held us close and apologized, over and over, praising the Lord's name. I embraced him in turn, but alongside the relief in my chest there was an anger in my gut. It had started a spark, but over the length of our trek back through the woods had grown into a steady flame. I met my sister's eyes over our father's shoulder, and a chill ran through me. If my anger was a flame, then hers was the dead cold of darkest winter. Our father explained that our stepmother had been stricken ill, not long after we left. She was in her room now, asleep, and had been for days. He did not expect her to recover, though he had been following the physician's orders as best he could. Perhaps she shall rally to see you, he offered us hopefully. When neither of us answered, he sighed and dragged a hand down his thick beard. There was more gray in it than I remembered. I know you must be angry with me. With us, he told us wretchedly. That I could lose track of you so easily. It is an unforgivable failing in a father. Lost. I started slightly at the sharp edge in my sister's voice. Our father did, too. She had always had a soft voice to match her heart. We were lost, she repeated, staring at him intently. Our father stared back, eyes wide with a hint of fear. Lost, he confirmed at last in little more than a whisper. I dropped my eyes, unable to continue looking at him. My sister did not. Abruptly, she stood from our small table. We will go see her, then. I blinked, startled both by the sudden movement and the conviction in her voice, but I followed her into our stepmother's sickroom. That flame of rage flickered a little higher in my chest, and I found that I could not make myself move more than 2 steps inside the door. My sister knelt beside the hateful woman, and smoothed a hand over her brow in a gesture so tender it made me want to break something. Here, She tipped one of the witch's vials against her lips. "This will help." I almost reached out to stop her. But as though she sensed the movement, she held a staying hand back toward me. When the vial was empty, she stood and brushed her hands down the front of her skirt. She did not look at me as she left the room. I hesitated a moment longer behind her, staring at the woman who had left us to the wood and the wild. Already, her breathing seemed easier. Anger and love for my sister Ward, twin flames in the center of my chest. She had always borne such a soft heart. Our stepmother was awake and lively within a day. Though shocked by our return, she was mollified enough by the offerings of treasure we had stolen away with that she simpered and even summoned up some mawkish tears through which to tell us she was so sorry we had been lost to the wood. My rage burned hotter, and my sister grew colder. "We should celebrate your return," our stepmother exclaimed, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders but no other sign of her illness remaining. "What do you wish for supper, my darlings?" "Sweetbread." I jerked around to stare at my sister, eyes wide and mouth agape. She did not so much as glance at me, but I felt her hand take mine under the table. She smiled at our stepmother, and my throat went dry. "But you are still recovering, stepmother." "I feel quite well, all things considered." "I shall make it," she offered gently. I could have stopped her then. Could have clutched her hand in mine and dragged us out. We could have taken the treasure and left. It had been foolish of me to think there was nowhere for us to go. We might go anywhere. Seeing our father again, hearing him refuse to admit what they had done, made me sure of that. But my sister looked at me, just for a moment, and the ice in her gaze froze me to my chair. She was not looking for permission, but I nodded shakily anyway. Our stepmother exclaimed what a good, kind girl she was as she moved into the kitchen. Soon enough, the cloying smell of the baking sweetbread hung thick in the air. It was all I could do not to gag. My sister served the plates while the bread was still steaming gently, even drizzling the last of our honey stores over our parents' portions. "We can always get more at the market now," she said with a hollow little laugh. Our stepmother agreed happily, though our father hesitated a moment before doing so himself. He was watching my sister with a faint wariness as she took her seat beside me. "Go on, then, let us eat." They did. We sat in silence. It took our stepmother first. A faint cough, a furrow in her brow. She looked up with confusion, which changed quickly to a horrified realization as she stared at my sister. "You." Our father choked, red spattering his lips. I looked away, squeezing my sister's hand tight where she had once more taken it beneath the table. We were desperate," he strangled out, reaching for her pleadingly. "I did not want to. She made me." My sister shook her head. "You let her." He collapsed forward onto the table, his breath a wheezing rattle that grew fainter with each passing moment. Our stepmother tried to lunge for us, but her legs gave out and she sprawled across the floor. A scarlet trail, like candied jam, trickled from the corner of her mouth. "You," she gasped again, glaring balefully up at my sister. "You, little witch." They both began to convulse. I buried my face in my sister's shoulder. I could feel her stroking my hair, even without raising my head. I knew she did not look away until their last breaths had faded into silence. Then she simply stood, her hand still in mine. We were both silent as we gathered up our bags, still unpacked by the front door, and stepped out into the cool evening. "You are afraid." I swallowed. "Why, yes." She smiled at me, squeezed my hand again, and all I felt was cold. "You do not need to be. I will protect you." My sister has always had a soft heart. Soft as poisoned sweetbread. Story 4. Mavis was now in her second year of retirement. Most days, she found things to do, but to be honest, she felt bored. Money was tight, it always had been. For decades, she'd worked for a large cleaning company that serviced offices, shopping malls, and municipal buildings. The staff room was always full of women, but they weren't exceptionally social. They exchanged greetings, asked after each other's families, then hurried home to husbands and children who needed feeding and fussing. After Clive's early death, Mavis simply got on with it, took the extra shifts, did her job well, came home to a quiet house, made a small supper, watched the telly, and turned in early so she could rise again at 4:30 the next morning. When her 65th birthday came around, the company announced a farewell due. Mavis didn't have the confidence to tell them she didn't want one, nor that she would have gladly worked another 10 years if they'd let her. So she accepted the card, the chocolates, and the traditional clock, smiled politely, and went home battling back tears of loneliness and loss, not because of sentiment but because of the strange emptiness of it all. Now, with no job to go to, no family to call, and no close friends to meet, she often felt she was simply existing. She'd never been much of a reader, and these days, the idea of picking up a book just made her feel even more alone. Sitting in her spotless front room, hands resting in her lap, she sighed and looked around. Everything gleamed. Everything was in its place. Still, something wasn't right. Her eye fell on the neatly folded local newspaper. She reached for it out of habit, flicked past the headlines, skipped the letters page, and turned, as she always did, to situations vacant. She tutted at herself. Don't be daft. You're 66. Who's going to hire you now? But then something caught her eye. Berkingsdale University, situations vacant. Part-time cleaner needed for the old library building. Contents must be prepared for auction. Books and fixtures require thorough cleaning. Ideal for an experienced individual who can work independently with minimal supervision. Interviews will be held at the Academic Registry, Main Assembly Hall, at 10 a.m. on Tuesday the 10th of June. References and letters of recommendation are essential. She sat bolt upright in her chair. It doesn't mention age, she thought excitedly. It says experienced. You have to be old if you're experienced. She'd never been one for friendships. Even Clive, her late husband, hadn't been much company. She took a deep breath and wondered if there were anyone she could contact to ask whether they thought she would be suitable. But as she flicked through her semi-dormant brain cells, she couldn't come up with anyone. Go on Tuesday for the interview. They can only say no. As the days passed, she began to feel more and more excited about the prospect of securing the part-time cleaning job. A reason to rise in the morning, a reason to prepare an evening meal for herself, a reason to sort through clean clothes for the early hours of the morning and set off for a responsible day of work, returning home to know that, within a few hours, she would be required to start the day all over again. How wonderful this would be. She arrived 10 minutes early at the appointed place. She noticed a row of chairs arranged against the wall and, after standing for a few minutes in anticipation of others' arrivals, eventually shrugged her shoulders and selected a seat in the middle of the row, perching her brown faux leather handbag on her knee as she waited. At precisely 10 o'clock, the door to the north of the main assembly hall swung open, and a gentleman with curly gray hair, likely in his late 70s, entered, dressed in a brown corduroy jacket with leather patches on each elbow. He glanced at Mavis and approached her. Mavis shifted her handbag and rose to her feet, bowing her head as he stood before her. Hello. Are you here for the 10.00 appointment? For the cleaner? The library, don't you know? Yes, sir, I am, said a nervous Mavis. Oh, please sit down. I am Jack Brown, the ex-librarian, and who might you be? I'm Mrs. Stevens. Mavis Stevens. Ah, Mavis Stevens. Good to meet you. Would you mind sharing a bit about yourself, your previous jobs and your experience in cleaning, preparing, and classifying items for auction? Oh, nothing like that, sir. I'm just a good cleaner. I've worked all my life cleaning and tidying, most of the offices here in town, private houses, and large shopping malls, that sort of thing. I have never worked in a university before and have never prepared items for an auction. But I can learn if you show me. Jack Brown smiled. Yes, I can show you what is required. After you've been shown what to do you think you can work on your own, Mrs. Stevens? We did not intend to employ more than one person, and as you can see, you appear to be the only candidate for the job. Mavis smiled excitedly. Oh yes, Mr. Brown, I enjoy working on my own, no problem at all. Well done, Mrs. Stevens. Shall I walk you to the library where you'll be working? I'll explain what is needed, and if you are still interested, we'll discuss your terms of employment. Is that all right? Mavis found her first few weeks enjoyable yet tiring. She was working in what had once been the university's central library. Over the years, various specialized libraries had been established, and as Dr. Brown informed her, the main library had ultimately outgrown its usefulness. Dr. Brown continued his work in the library, but as his retirement approached, a decision was made to close the old library. All fixtures and fittings would be auctioned off, and ultimately, the library would be demolished, with new university buildings constructed and allocated to various disciplines. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Mavis let herself into the old library each working day, and apart from Dr. Brown, saw no one at all. She never questioned where anyone was. After all, this building was being prepared for demolition, everyone must be working elsewhere. Against one of the walls, large plastic cartons had been arranged, and Mavis had been instructed to pack the books she had meticulously dusted and polished as soon as Dr. Brown had catalogued each one. The two got along splendidly. He rarely spoke, and Mavis worked as she always had, in complete silence. One day, while working alone as usual, Mavis passed the large library table in the center of the room and noticed a peculiar, heavy glass paperweight she didn't recall having seen before. It rested on a jade green base, which bore a tarnished brass nameplate. Although it was in dire need of a polish, she could just make out the words, Berkingsdale Library, 1952. That puzzled her. It was 1952, yet the paperweight seemed old, as if it belonged to another era. Strange, she thought. The dome, however, gleamed as if she had just polished it to a shine. It was a handsome piece. She returned to her tasks. But a faint dusting on the table caught her eye. Clutching her ever-reliable yellow duster, she leaned in, inhaling the familiar scent of polished teak, and began to wipe the surface. In the hush of the old library, a flicker of movement startled her. She straightened sharply. Had she just seen a mouse? She turned in a swift half-circle, scanning for any sign of rodent life. Nothing. Stillness. The silence returned. Her gaze wandered back to the paperweight. For the first time, she realized the dome housed a miniature scene, a diorama of the very room in which she stood, captured in exquisite detail. Books, desks, shelves, and arches, all perfectly scaled. But as she looked, disbelief washed over her. Inside the paperweight, tiny figures were moving, browsing, turning pages, and consulting one another. The library, contained within the dome, was alive. Mavis leaned closer. There were students, professors, and people chuckling quietly or engrossed in their studies. The same towering bookcases, now brimming with books, had spines that gleamed. The worn library she had been dusting for weeks was transformed. In the far corner of the teak desk, she heard a tiny female student sigh loudly. She gasped. Another minute figure appeared, distinctly audible as it spoke. Are you struggling with that research paper? Shall I fetch you a cup of tea? Mavis blinked in disbelief. Had she really heard that? Surely not. She cast a glance around her own library. No Dr. Brown. No one. Just her and this impossible dome. Mavis continued to gaze in wonder, transfixed by the unfolding scene inside the paperweight. She leaned in further. The double wooden doors of the miniature library swung open and closed as more figures arrived, some young, some older. There was a bustle of quiet industry. At the back of the scene, near a large table, stood a catering area with a tea urn, pots, cups, and biscuits. A woman in crisp white linen smiled kindly at each visitor. Mavis leaned in so closely that her cheek nearly touched the glass. The scene seemed to swell, becoming more detailed. Then the catering lady looked up, and waved. Mavis recoiled, her heart racing. The woman was her. Not quite as she looked now, but as she had been. Open-faced, content, radiant. It was like seeing a happier ghost of herself. Before she could make sense of it, a voice beside her said, "Ah, you found us, Mrs. Stevens." It was Dr. Brown who had appeared quietly alongside her. "I don't understand, Dr. Brown. What is this?" He looked gently towards the dome. "Well, that's you." The woman waving. "You know her quite well, don't you?" She glanced again, then turned back to him. "But, I thought I was cleaning. Helping with an auction. I never saw this before." Dr. Brown gave a soft chuckle. "May I call you Mavis?" "I'm Jack." She nodded warily. "During your interview time here, you have proven yourself. We needed someone who could move quietly among us, someone gentle, someone who could bring comfort." "My interview," she said, her eyes widening. "I've been here for weeks. Did you think I wasn't doing a good job?" Jack shook his head. "You've been doing exactly what we hoped for. It wasn't your cleaning we were assessing, it was your presence." Mavis turned away from him and looked back into the dome. The catering woman, herself, was now joined by a gray-haired man who was being offered a steaming hot cup of tea. "Oh look," Jack said, with a quiet laugh. "Seems to be me." Mavis blinked. She anticipated seeing the vast, dusty library behind her, but instead, when she turned, she found herself inside the dome. "But, what is this place?" she whispered. Jack smiled. "We'd like to offer you a permanent position." Inside the paperweight, she stared, dumbfounded. "We've all passed on, you see," he explained. "Librarians, readers, quiet souls, the sort the world forgets. But the paperweight remembers. It holds what mattered to us. And when you died, just weeks after retirement, our chief librarian asked whether we'd like you to join us." "Me? Died?" she said faintly. She looked down at herself, in her white linen uniform, content, composed. "I don't feel dead," she murmured. "In fact, I look more alive than I have in years." "We thought you might prefer catering over shelving," said Jack. "You're not a big reader, after all. But your presence brings comfort. And tea. And that's something we value very highly." The edges of the dome began to shimmer and then vanished. She hadn't moved, yet she was inside, entirely, at last. Gentle hands guided her to the large chairs in the corner. Around her, voices rose in welcome. She sipped the tea they had brought her and looked around, proud of the shelves she had polished to such a shine. "Jack," she asked. "Yes, Mavis. What happens to the paperweight when they knock the building down?" Jack smiled. "Oh, Mavis, the old library was demolished years ago. The chief librarian is the custodian now.
If you
The
enjoyed this
paperweight is
story,
passed
be
down
sure to
from the
hit the
chief
like button,
librarian to the next
subscribe,
chief
and comment
librarian.
where you're listening from.
It's in excellent hands."
And if you want
In
more
Mavis,
rain-soaked
who'd known
nightmares,
so little
check out
joy
the
in
next
life with
video.
Clive, found it at
Sleep
last,
tight, if you
inside
can.
the glass, with gentle purpose, quiet friendship, and a seat by the kettle. Story 5. Change. I'm not sure what just happened, and neither is my boyfriend. We're both spooked and looking for answers we'll likely never find. For context, Tim and I have lived together for 2 years and honestly have never had any serious fights. Some important details. He's bald. He shaved his head last year when he decided it would look better than having thinning hair. This has never caused any issues with my attraction to him, and he knows that. He works a job that sometimes has him leaving town for short stretches of time. Normally, he's gone for just a few nights and will tell me if plans change and he's staying later or coming home earlier than expected. And finally, he's incredibly kind. Our arguments don't end in raised voices and definitely don't end in name-calling or abuse. I've been belittled and verbally abused by past partners, so I know a bad man when I see one. He isn't one. At the end of last week, Tim left for one of his work trips and said he would be gone until Tuesday morning. I dropped him off at the airport on Friday evening and began my weekend alone with our 2 cats. He didn't call me at all while he was gone. This was unusual, but I figured he must be busy, so I brushed it off. He had sent me a "just landed" text later on Friday, which was good enough for me. I woke up on Monday morning to a freezing house. It's currently about 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit every day where I live, and I never keep the AC too cold for my comfort. When I checked the temperature, it showed the same number it always does despite the air around me feeling frigid. The cats were cuddled together on the couch under our throw blanket. As I was deciding whether or not to simply turn up the room temperature, the front door opened and my boyfriend shuffled in. "Hi." I greeted him, confused but excited to see him. I was sure I hadn't gotten a "coming home today" text from him, but I could have missed it. As surprised as I was by his early return, I was more puzzled by the beanie on his head. Who wears a beanie in July? And why had I never seen him wear this dark blue one before? Tim said nothing, aggressively threw his duffel bag down at my feet, and shuffled down the hall to our bedroom. I followed him and asked him how his trip went. He grunted in response and slammed the bedroom door. Immediately the worst assumptions ran through my mind. Maybe he'd lost his job. Maybe he, for some out of the blue reason, assumed I had done something to break his trust while he was gone. I knocked on the bedroom door. "Can we talk?" I asked sheepishly. Tim opened the door and stood there staring at me menacingly. "You were supposed to call me and you didn't," he said with a coldness in his voice I had never heard before. He hadn't asked me to call him. And as I've stated, normally he's the one who calls me throughout these trips. "I mean, I'm sorry, but," I started to reply. Tim pushed past me, stomped over to the living room couch, threw his beanie across the room, and sat down, crossing his arms over his chest. That's when I noticed he had hair again. Not just a tiny bit of fuzz like he was due for a shave but didn't get around to it. He had the exact amount of hair he'd had right before he made the decision to go bald, with the same thinning pattern. The entire house was still very cold, but the air immediately around Tim felt especially frigid. "Why didn't you call me, you fucking bitch?" he demanded when he finally spoke again. His voice was so loud that it scared the cats out of the room. I didn't answer. I couldn't form an answer. Tears welling in my eyes, I turned away from him and started toward the kitchen. As I was hastily cooking some scrambled eggs and trying to calm myself, I glanced back and saw Tim staring at me from the doorway. His arms were slack at his sides and his eyes were empty and dead. The air in the kitchen began to feel colder. He stood there just like that the entire time I cooked. It wasn't just that Tim was being harsh toward me for seemingly no reason. The entire aura around him felt off. This was Tim, but it was all wrong. I offered him a plate of eggs but he didn't respond or even sit at the table with me. As I ate, he retreated to the bedroom and stood watching me behind the partially closed door. He stayed in our bedroom in complete silence for the rest of the morning. I left for work after an hour, hoping things would maybe get a little less weird after we had some time apart. I returned home late that night to an extraordinarily cold house. Every room felt like a walk-in freezer. The light was on in our bedroom but Tim was still shut inside. I decided to sleep on the couch, though Tim's presence still creeped me out even from behind that closed door. But when I woke up the next morning, the light was off in our bedroom and Tim was gone. Normally he would take a day off of work after traveling, so I hadn't expected him to be at work that morning. The temperature in the house felt normal again. I reached for my phone and saw a text from Tim. "Just landed," it said. It was sent an hour ago. Then I noticed I had several missed calls from Tim from over the last several days. Calls that hadn't come through at all. He left a voicemail early this morning. As I was listening to it, the front door opened and Tim walked in. "Hello," he shouted in his usual cheerful way. He set his duffel bag down gently along the wall and pulled me into a hug. His hair was gone. "Sorry to surprise you," he said. I decided to take a lift home instead of calling you so early to pick me up. I told Tim what I'd experienced yesterday. I told him all about how creepy and mean he'd been acting and how I hadn't been getting any phone calls. And now we're both trying to figure who, or what, was in our house with me.